Northbound. Back in May, I bought a ticket to visit my friend Hannah in Skagway, Alaska. She was on her second stint working a temp job at a vacation resort, and I found plane tickets cheap out of Seattle. It sounded like a great excuse to visit another state full of wilderness. While planning the trip, I realized I could also visit friends in Bellingham, Washington, and Vancouver, British Columbia, to make a big loop. The first step was to get a bus 2 hours north of Seattle to Bellingham. I bought a ticket on the presumption I could get my bicycle on that bus. I rode 10 miles south into downtown and found the bus waiting in Chinatown. Navigating downtown Seattle is a workout in itself. The city has been built up multiple times farther and farther from the water. It is nothing but steep and dangerous hills. It makes San Francisco seem easy. I successfully navigated the treacherous urban core and got in line for the bus. I showed the driver my ticket and told him I had a bike with me. He gave me this, "oh, brother" type look on his face and said, "You'll have to remove your wheels and see if it will fit below the hatch." That's precisely what I did. I brought 2 of my bike bags strapped to each other on board, then stuffed the other 2 below. I was nervously impressed that everything fit down there and thankful that I got on that bus. The drive through northern Washington was lovely and mountainous. Nothing but beautiful, lush greenery in every direction. After arriving in Bellingham, I rode from the station to Megan and Andrew's place on the other side of town. They shared a small apartment with Megan's 2 daughters and let me crash on the recliner in the living room. I knew Megan and Andrew from a grocery store we all worked at in 2015. I had helped them pack up their belongings to move out of Kansas only a year earlier. They were excited to host me, as I was the first person from Kansas City to come out and visit. Bellingham is a small coastal city with a hippie vibe similar to Lawrence, Kansas. It was mostly flat, but surrounded by incredible mountain views. Megan showed me around town, and we hiked in the local parks. They mentioned how they had yet to take a trip out of the city because there was so much to do there. I only stayed 2 nights, but felt like I experienced what Bellingham had to offer. My next goal was to ride from Bellingham to the Canadian border and find my friends Catherine and Leon in Vancouver. I was bursting with anticipation ever since I had met them in my first week of riding back in the Arizona desert. They invited me to stay in their townhome and show me around the big city when I made my way full circle up north. The border was only 20 miles away, and I quickly arrived before 10 a.m. I texted Leon, and he met me at the border station in the camper van I first met them in at the KOA. We picked up Catherine at their home, and they took me to Boundary Bay for a swim. We visited Centennial Beach, and the sand seemed to go forever. We joined hundreds of smiling citizens on a warm, sunny day. The lake was shallow, so we walked out to a sandbar we saw a couple hundred feet out. Their extended family met up with us, and we had a little potluck. Spending the afternoon on the water was a dream and a great beginning to Vancouver. We eventually returned to the house, and Catherine cooked us a fantastic dinner. Catherine and Leon are fascinating and kind people. I appreciated their endless curiosity and loving hospitality. The next day, they took me through downtown Vancouver and gave me an extensive tour of the different neighborhoods. We made our way to Stanley Park, their equivalent to Central Park in New York. It was full of walking paths, lush greenery, and huge trees. As we walked around, they told me about the park's history. They pointed out the Ironworkers Memorial Second Narrows Bridge. This bridge starts in the park and connects the city across the Burrard Inlet. This bridge is longer than the Golden Gate and enters the North Shore Mountains. I'd never realized there was a mountain range that close to Vancouver and was stricken by the beautiful juxtaposition it creates with the city. Looking across the inlet, I saw houses, twisting roads, and a snow-capped rocky fortress that led into other mountains that seemingly never ended. If you look on Google Maps, everything north of Vancouver is basically one gigantic mountain range. Leon suggested we go over the bridge and check out a view of the city from the top of the mountain. I was game, and we could see the span of the city all the way to Vancouver Island. I don't know the exact elevation we got to, but we were definitely in the clouds. We came down from our mountain high and promptly visited the downtown Riverwalk for a skate park and a beer. We went home after a full day and Catherine cooked again. After dinner, Leon had to replace the brake pads on their RV, so I didn't see him much until the morning. Catherine suggested I take a few days to explore Victoria on Vancouver Island. I was apprehensive, but they encouraged that I'd be missing out if I didn't go. I looked at my calendar and figured I could carve out a few days before flying to Alaska. In the morning, Leon got ready to drive me to the ferry station, and we realized their camper van wasn't parked in the driveway, which was weird because that's where Leon worked on the brakes. They convinced themselves he must have accidentally parked it elsewhere in their apartment complex and didn't think much of it. We got on the highway in their SUV, and 15 minutes into the drive, we heard the bike rack break. I watched in horror as my bike almost fell onto the road, going 90 kilometers an hour. I shed a tear as we stopped on the shoulder to assess the damage. Everything was intact, so we stuffed it into the back seat with me and continued toward the ferry dock. I was pleasantly surprised to find the Victoria Ferry was quite luxurious. The boat was a full-on cruise ship that only cost $15 to get to the island. They had bicycles ride up a giant ramp where the cars and semis load in. And then they had me locked to a stairwell that leads up to the seating area. The cabin had Wi-Fi, restaurants, and convenience stores. I enjoyed the experience and felt privileged to ride on such a vessel. About 30 minutes later, we reached the dock, the hatch lifted, and our mob of cyclists came screeching out like bats from hell. I had no clue where to stay for the night, but I needed to find Wi-Fi since I had no phone service. I had to ride down the island about 10 miles to get to the city. I was giddy to discover the island had a lot of paved trail systems, and I didn't have to get on a road once. I found Wi-Fi at a coffee shop and reserved a bed at a downtown hostel. I had never been to a hostel before and was excited to see what it was like. They gave me a locker and I had a small bunk with a curtain for privacy. I quite enjoyed it. I got a text from Catherine saying they filed a police report about their missing RV. She explained the police found the vehicle parked a couple miles from their complex and they arrested the thief. Looks like they got lucky. It was afternoon by this point, and I had plenty of daylight left. I needed to find some food and explore the city. I hit up a grocery store and found a skate park on the way. I ended up skating for about an hour and then lollygagged around downtown, trying to feel out the scene. Victoria is an old city and historically a British colony. I don't know how it became Canadian, but the English roots are still apparent in the architecture. Pubs, brick streets, and tall lanterns. There were also water taxis that zipped along the coast. I took in an IMAX movie at the local museum and grabbed a fat slice of pizza before returning to my bunk. It excited me to go back someday and explore the island's northern half, which is supposedly an outdoorsman's paradise. I grabbed a ferry back to Washington State, and it took me a day and a half to ride back to Seattle. I was dropped off in Anacortes, Washington, and stayed in a hotel in Marysville during a hectic weekend. The only hotel room I could find was $100 and a smoking room. I grudgingly checked in and was looking forward to a quiet evening. When I walked into my room, I heard the TV on. I thought, that's random, but then spotted luggage on the floor and slowly reversed out to the hallway. Thankfully, the inhabitant couldn't see me around the corner. I asked the front desk attendant to give me a new room, but she didn't seem to feel bad for my embarrassment due to her mistake. Gotta love the customer service industry. In the morning, I enjoyed the continental breakfast with a few Hispanic gentlemen. We were all laughing our asses off at the SpongeBob marathon that was on TV. It was a heartwarming start before returning to Seattle for a few days and preparing to catch my flight to Alaska. Phil was nice enough to drive me to the airport at 3 a.m., but we were both dead from waking up that early. This was my first time on a plane in a couple of years, and I was tripping out on all the security. I felt fresh to the elaborate system of guilt they force us to endure in American airports. After being autonomous on a bicycle for 4 months, going on a plane felt bizarre. It was like I was learning about the world all over again. I ended up being one of 2 passengers on the whole plane, and the flight attendants were joking around telling us we could sit wherever we wanted, nudging us that we should have brought more luggage. It was a gorgeous 2.5-hour flight as I lusted over the Canadian mountains that I had been introduced to only a week earlier. Seeing this never-ending mountain range from 40,000 feet was worth the money I paid for the ticket. Snow-capped peaks and crystal-clear lakes were spanning in every direction. It was dreamy to be caught up in this other world that felt perfectly cinematic. I landed in Juneau, the capital of Alaska, and had to find my way to the ferry 5 miles away. The airport was tiny. They hardly even had a security check because the terminal is literally 1 room. I was able to call a taxi, and the driver kindly took me to McDonald's for some breakfast before I shipped off on a ferry. Something interesting I discovered about Alaska is that there is only 1 road leading north, which leaves most of the state only accessible by boat or plane. Skagway, Alaska, is inaccessible by road, so I hopped the 10 a.m. ferry for 7 hours through the foggy expanse. This ferry experience was vastly different from the Canadian cruise liner in Victoria. It featured waiting room-style plastic bucket seats with no amenities. It also cost significantly more. I made the best of the dingy settings as I was still excited to cross off another first from my accidental bucket list. I was going to visit my friend Hannah. She is a songwriter, and I imagined her voice as a soundtrack to the calm, foggy water and sharp mountain tips surrounding our vessel. My imagination was captured by the quiet beauty of these sleeping giants. The mountains felt like natural protectors of this massive area we call a state, though it probably doesn't deserve to be a part of the United States. When I arrived in Skagway, I was greeted by two full-size cruise ships standing 6 stories tall, docked and unloading tourists into the sleepy main street. Skagway is primarily a tourist town for these Alaskan excursion ships. When I walked off the ferry, I immediately saw my friend Hannah waiting in a 4x4 truck to pick me up. Her powerful curly hair was billowing out of a Carhartt beanie as she waved me down. It was surreal to think I was there with her at that moment. 1,500 miles from Seattle and might as well be on the other side of the world. Modern travel is a trip, dude. Hannah is another friend from my church camp days. She had spent a couple years bouncing around the country taking temp jobs in tourism. I was honored that she allowed me to come out and see what she was up to and stay at her employee bunker. It was 5 p.m., so we met with her friends for dinner. We grabbed burgers at a restaurant a block away, and she recommended a local beer for me to try. I noticed everything was more expensive than I was used to, but I'd find out that was normal here. It's hard to get supplies to this part of the country, as is most places in Alaska. Her friends were easygoing, and they only knew each other from working at the adventure company. She gave me a tour of the little downtown strip that resembled a Western film. There were jewelry shops and trinket emporiums to lure tourists into remembering this desolate place with a knickknack. They had a brewery and a few restaurants varying in price and cuisine. It was all built to look like the Old West and even had covered wooden sidewalks linking each store. The road was even dirt. One of the perks of Hannah's job is that they provide housing for the seasonal employees. She was sneaking me in to sleep on the top bunk of her room. Her roommates were all cool and it felt like hanging out in my hometown. Hannah was a zipline tour guide and offered to take me the next day. We had a lazy morning and picked up some supplies at the grocery store first thing. She taught me how to shop in the expensive convenience store grocers. After lunch, we hopped on a shuttle from town to the adventure area in the mountains. There was a lot of off-roading involved to find the scenic wilderness. We got closer and closer to the mountain and passed over rivers full of salmon. Apparently, this is one of the northernmost areas that salmon swim to. It was federally protected land, and I was in awe watching the thousands of salmon fighting their way upstream. It was a beautiful natural occurrence. Once we got to the entrance, she gave me the rundown on how we would jump on one of her friend's tours, but she was going to lead it. She just gave the guy at the counter a wink and a nod, and he handed me a harness to don. The 15 of us participants hopped onto this custom bus built from an old military truck. The thing looked like a monster truck and had 5-foot tires. It was an off-roading beast. We followed a channel carved out by a glacier and slowly chugged our way up the mountain on some treacherously steep terrain. These 23-year-old tour guides really know how to give us a ride we will remember. The zipline tour lasted 2 hours and was a series of platforms that connected to each other until you arrive at the bottom near the gift shop again. Hannah eloquently performed her script of dad jokes to keep the group calm and entertained. She taught us how to do a front flip into a zip. That was scary. I'm afraid of heights, but I trusted her technique and halfway did one. It was a fun adventure and another activity I'd never experienced before. We finished the tour and grabbed the shuttle back into town. Everything was walkable in Skagway, so we returned to our house as it was getting dark. She showed me this hiking trail with the grave of some old explorer. We looked at the skate park, not worth much. We saw her friends ripping around on mopeds in the neighborhood and followed them back to Hannah's porch. We kicked it for a couple hours while her friend played us cover songs on his acoustic guitar. The next day, I hung around Hannah's and watched movies until we needed to walk towards the water to catch my afternoon flight. I bought a ticket on a boat plane to get back to the main airport in Juneau. When we arrived, the office informed us that the weather had canceled my flight. That was no bueno. Not only did I need to catch the other flight back to Seattle, but there were only a couple ferries that left town each day to Juneau. Thankfully, I could catch the ferry after only 45 minutes of replanning. I bid Hannah farewell as she went to start her shift on the zip line, and I could sit down and breathe for a few minutes. I rescheduled my flight to Seattle for the following day and was relieved to be heading back. On the ferry, I reconnected with a woman Hannah knew named Lisa. This was great news because she had a friend in Juneau who could give me a free ride from the ferry terminal to the airport. We arrived around 11 p.m. and I was ready to get some shut-eye. I entered the one-room airport and placed my bags as a pillow on the floor next to the baggage claim carousel. I miraculously slept till 5 a.m., which is perfect considering my flight was at 7:30. I had to work one more closing shift at the restaurant before leaving Seattle. I was anticipating a long day of public transit. Once at the Tacoma airport, I had to take the train 45 minutes to downtown Seattle, then catch a series of 2 buses and stop at Phil's. After Phil's, I grabbed a bus 20 more miles north to the restaurant. I don't know how I did it, but I made it to work around 3 p.m. and was exhausted. Before leaving the city, I modified my bike and tried a new setup for the ride down the coast. I went to a thrift store and bought 2 sand pails and a pair of XL fisherman pants. I sewed the 2 pant legs like waterproof duffel bags and added a strap to cinch it closed. I attached the sand pails to my front fork, strapped my new duffels into them, and sold 2 panniers I had been using on the trip up to this point. It was exciting and stupid. Something about making a little cash was obsessive to me. I wanted to prove to myself that I could still tap into my DIY nature, and it was fun to call something my own. I bid the North farewell as I prepared to journey south towards San Francisco. I enjoyed this random few weeks to take side adventures and try a lot of new things. It was also helpful to make a little cash. I was thankful to my friends here in the Northwest for putting me up and putting up with me. I couldn't have asked for better people in my life. The night before I left Seattle, I sang karaoke with Phil at a bar near his house. We reminisced about the years we've known each other and got excited about what our futures will hold. This part of the country is now a treasure in my heart, and I'll be obsessing until I can come back and conquer the Cascades by bicycle with my mental health intact. I felt like a hot mess most of the time, and now my heart was full. The Pacific Northwest is such a beautiful place, and I can now understand the allure of living here. If you're okay with rain and haze all year round, it's the perfect place. I hope I found the energy to get another 1,000 miles to the finish line.